Okay, I'm gonna call to order this Transforming Teaching and Learning Committee meeting at 5:12. We'll start with item 2, public comments for agenda topics. Do we have public comments?
No, sir, there are no public comments.
Okay. Item number 3 is nurturing academic ownership with blended learning. Dr. Veronica Corta.
Good afternoon, Committee Chair, board members, Dr. Neela, senior team, and our audience. This afternoon, we are going to just bring a couple of things forward with how we're nurturing academic ownership through blended learning. And so I'm going to start off by talking a little bit about timing, because anytime we have innovation and change, timing makes all the difference. It makes a difference because you want to bring people along with you. So certain things have to be in place before you can do full-scale innovation. And so as we go through today, I will say that timing has been critical with all of our work in blended learning. So this afternoon, we're going to talk a little bit about our journey as a district with blended learning. Been years in the making. And yes, this young lady over here in the gray t-shirt is also here in person, so you get to hear a little bit about her in just a little while. But years ago, a few years back, we had the opportunity to apply for and were funded for a Raising Blended Learners grant. And as that grant came in, we identified 2 campuses, 2 elementary schools, and we were bringing blended learning into those 2 campuses. Great work is happening there. We selected Stewart Place Elementary and Bowie Elementary and looked at that, at both of those schools. But as we started our whole blended learning journey, and Mrs. Romero is in the room, we about maybe halfway through that first year of implementation, we realized that something magical was happening at those campuses. And I say that because of all the data that we were able to look at. So as we tracked their progress, we realized that students were growing by leaps and bounds, and that was about halfway through the year. At the end of the year, here are just a few of the highlights with student data. Several successes and highlights that we could look at. But for today, I want to just kind of point out a couple of things. When we implemented blended learning, our very first year of implementation at those 2 schools, we saw that our students grew tremendously with their reading ability. And we all know that that's a foundation of learning. We have to be able to read and be effective readers in order to succeed in academics. So that was the first thing we noticed. The other thing that we noticed, which was a huge celebration, is that our students that had the highest academic need were also growing, really growing at those schools. As a matter of fact, we had a decrease of 19% of students in that tier 3 category, which tier 3 is the highest need, highest academic need. So all the time that we were going through that year, we started sharing all the data with our organization. We wanted to tell the story of blended learning. And as soon as we started sharing the story, I think Jessica, almost on a daily basis, would get requests like, how do we do that? What does that look like? How can we get it into our classrooms? So we know that sometimes you need to go slow to go fast with innovation. We couldn't do a whole entire district to move into blended learning because there's a lot of integral pieces. What we could do, though, is that we could align our teaching and learning framework. So that summer, after our first year of implementation, that's exactly what we did. We aligned our teaching and learning framework and brought in all the cornerstones of blended learning. And that's how we started expanding this whole concept of blended learning. And let me tell you, it spread like wildfire. And so as we went on, we also got several calls from principals about, so what's the next part of blended learning? So this year we expanded. We have found a lot of value in our district with something that we call studio schools. These studio schools start with an innovation and they become the place that their colleagues can come to learn with whatever innovation we're looking at. In particular today, I'm going to talk a little bit, or I'll have Jessica talk a little bit about our blended learning expansion and how we went from those 2 studio schools at the initial onset to 5 this school year. So I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Rushka so she can talk a little bit about that.
Awesome. Good evening, everybody. So like Dr. Corton mentioned, we did take the opportunity after that first year to really incorporate what we were learning into the teaching and learning framework, right? But in addition to that, we did take on a couple of other schools as studio schools. And so not only did we have Bowie and Stewart, but we added Bonham, Zavala, and our very own Memorial Middle School, we'll talk a little bit more about here in just a little bit. But in addition to those studio schools, we also knew that we had pockets of success and that momentum was growing with blended learning. And so we took that opportunity to not only have those studio schools, but our 280 teachers that we trained in blended learning to really start practicing that craft at their campus. And so those are pockets of teachers at every one of our campuses. And then finally, we took the best of what we were getting from our kids, the high yield practices. We're saying, let's do this with everybody. And so we ended up having 2 district focuses this year, which were those student data trackers. If you recall, you heard student data trackers and student-led conferences probably a lot throughout the year. And so that's what those district focuses are. But I want to shift your attention a little bit. We've talked a lot about elementary with blended learning. We haven't talked a lot about is what does that look like in our secondary campuses? And so like I mentioned, we've got some amazing people in the audience. I cannot wait to show them off a little bit here in just a second. But we were able to implement blended learning this year in math and reading for all of our 6th grade students at Memorial Middle School. And so I want to just showcase a little bit about timeline with that. So this is our first year. So if you really think about it, we've probably been implementing blended learning, let's call it 5 months. Right? Because you can imagine that it takes a little bit of time to learn, to acclimate to a new way of teaching, etc. So the teachers have really been doing this for about 5 months. And we started pulling some data after that and really comparing what we were seeing with our studio school versus our other middle schools. And I won't read all of those off to you. You have them definitely in front of you. But the 2 benchmarks that we really took, or data sources really, were our second benchmark and our math scores. And there's this consistent increase with our studio schools that they are continuing to not only grow, everybody has grown, right? But even outperform some of our non-studio schools. This data set here represents 2 of our teachers at Memorial Middle School. So if you can see on your right-hand side, that is reading, and on your left-hand side, that is math, okay? And so, as you can probably imagine, yes, the outcomes are amazing, and our students are doing amazing things, but the teachers play a huge role and component in making this happen and these outcomes happen. My hat's off to our Memorial teachers, because not only have this year have they had to make a huge mindset shift change, right? They changed their practices. They had to trust the process along the way, right? And honestly, they led their team in something that was extremely different, with a positive attitude, and said, come on, we're gonna do this, we're gonna do it together, okay? So with that being said, I do want to take a second to highlight these 2 teachers in person. So Ms. Milligan and Ms. Sanchez, will you please stand and be recognized? Amazing work that these 2 teachers have done along with their colleagues. And so one of the things that we keep coming back to with blended learning is some key success points, right? And this has been the same with Memorial. So one of those key success points has been this whole concept of station rotation. Now there's many different ways that you can do blended learning. This is one that we really dove into and has been able to work not only in the elementary setting, but also in the secondary setting. It's really allowing that time and space for teachers to pull those small groups to personalize instruction. It's also allowed them to have the autonomy to say, hey kids, you get a little bit of voice and choice and how and what and when you want to do things through their must-dos and may-dos. We've incorporated and embraced some of our adaptive programming, such as Mathia and some others that we've piloted along the way, to really drive the data pieces for our instruction, and then get into those student data chats where we have seen students build their confidence in themselves, build that relationship with their teacher along the way, and really create this whole community of learners that are pushing along this academic ownership piece of their learning. They have ownership of it. They're getting to choose. They know their data, right? And so it has created this whole movement, if you will, at this campus. Now, I know Dr. Berton talked about timing, right? I think timing is a huge piece of that, of where we're at. I will say that Memorial Middle School was not only ready, their teachers were not only ready for this type of innovation, but so was their leadership. And I will say, I have watched time and time again, their leadership team remove barriers for teachers. Give them the space to take risks and put a supporting environment out there. Not only have they done that, one of the things that I love about Memorial Middle School and what they've done, they've taken their own learning from blended learning and put it into their systems. So just like teachers have student data chats, they've implemented things like teacher data chats and have modeled that even in their own system, which is an amazing thing. So at this time, I'd like to recognize our leadership team at Memorial Middle School as well, Mr. Snavely, Ms. Rodriguez, Ms. Jarris, would you please stand? So I think at this time, I'm going to have Dr. Berton come up and talk a little bit about scaling and sustainability.
Two words that we always come back to, right? Scaling and sustainability. And so I'm going to take us real far back to when we started talking about this little program called Night House. And so what started as this program for literacy instruction has changed the trajectory of all kinds of things in our district. Not only has it changed trajectories for students, it also changed the way that we prepare educators to teach kids how to read. But you think about that, aside from Mrs. Romero and Mrs. Alvarez, some of the things that come up with that: systemic implementation, right? Common set of expectations, research-based practices, and proven practices. And for years now, we've talked about, wouldn't it be great if we had something the equivalent of Night House for math? And so here we are, getting ready to scale blended learning in a very different way. Earlier in the year, you probably remember that we talked about the LASSO Blended Learning Grant. And so we applied for that through TEA and were awarded that grant. That is going to enable us to bring in a systemic approach to teaching mathematics, much like Night House, all through our strong foundations work that Mrs. Garza has been leading. So starting in August, grades 3 through 5 will have a math program and math instruction, much like what we've talked about with blended learning. It's about expanding blended learning into those classrooms. So really excited about that. The other thing too is that we're going to keep our 5 studio schools. We're going to refine practices there, and we're going to continue to bring other campuses to those studio schools so we can continue the learning and help it just maximize everything that we're doing. And so I do want to take a minute to just say, yes, sir.
I have a question. So I guess we're in between year 2 and then going to year 3 right now, right? That's where you're making the jump.
Right.
Stupid question, just and I don't know if the blended learning is also at the high schools or it's just for elementary and middle schools, or it's all schools.
That's a great question. So it is. So
And then the follow-up question, you can answer that. And then the follow-up question is, if that's the case, when we finish year 3, what % of our students will be involved in blended learning? Just curiosity.
I don't know, and Dr. Boucher might be able to give you a percentage. But with these teachers that we are bringing in, with our blend, she calls them the blended learning crew. Those teachers are kind of the equivalent when we started digital classrooms. We had these cohorts of teachers and we said, opt in, we're ready to help you. That's really how we're getting it into the high school as well. We started with, we know elementary and secondary have very different needs, very different practices. And so we started with Memorial because, as she said, that culture was ready to not only learn, but to also teach colleagues, right? And so with the high school, like I said, I don't know that we have an actual percentage. We can get that for you and send that your way. But I can tell you that every time we turn around,
we're sending more people out to secondary campuses because they want to do blended
But
learning.
obviously, those 19 schools are all of our elementaries, is that correct?
Sure.
And then, I guess, more of our middle
Right.
schools, correct?
Right. And like I said, we are doing it, and as she's supporting South, and Jennifer Maldonado is supporting HHS when we think about on-site support. And really, that's how we're getting it out, to make sure that we're honing in on the high schools as well. So we do have work at the high schools, not as prevalent at the elementary and middle schools. So as we go through blended learning, Dr. Rushka always reminds us, it's not a program. It's a way of teaching. And as we get further into the work, soon, blended learning will be terms of the past, and that's just going to be how we do teaching and learning. And so as we have jumped into this work, we have learned more and more about we have to build capacity in the system to be able to sustain it. Because not only are principals asking for it, teachers now are asking, how do I refine my practices to bring blended learning in? I think it's a huge celebration. And as we have continued to tell the story, the data tells the story. We don't even have to tell the story. But if you look at all of our successes that we're having with students in those environments, it's telling us this is the way we need to go if we're truly going to close that academic achievement gap. And I think when we think about timing, blended learning came in, I'm going to say that first year of implementation came in when we were post-pandemic. And what we learned from Bowie and Stewart Place is that if we stay true to that model, it's going to help us get further along with closing those gaps. And the other thing that I'll say is that at the beginning of the presentation, we said we were going to talk about academic ownership. When you are in a blended learning environment, we made a commitment, first of all, with our strategic plan, a plan for our community, where we said, here are 3 belief statements. There are 5 goals in our 3 belief statements. The second belief statement is all about academic ownership. And when we hone in on academic ownership, it's critical for our students, because not only are they able to say through the blended learning practices, they're able to say where I am today and what is my destination? Where am I headed? What are my goals going to look like? And when they do that, in between both of those points, they can advocate for themselves, and they can say, this is what I need for my own learning. So there's a very different culture, and when you go into those classrooms, it's incredible to see kids this big and now this big moving into a space where they're saying, like, here are the skills that I need to hone in on, where are my resources? So when it's in its full implementation, that's really what blended learning looks like. And I would be remiss, before we jump into questions and conversation, I would be remiss if I didn't say, this lady here, I can honestly say 100%, every single day she comes in, she is going to spread a little bit of blended learning glitter wherever she goes. And you think about the importance of human capital, people have to be in the right seats at the right time. And let me tell you, Jessica has been phenomenal with blended learning. And she continues to push the envelope, and as she's going, she's a thought partner for campuses, and she's a shoulder partner. She's also the person that's pushing the envelope and saying, I think you can do more. I know we said 2 teachers, but how about 3 or 4, right? And so every time we are working with our campuses, we hear a lot about this would not have been possible unless we would have a great leader that really is passionate about blended learning. So kudos to Dr. Rushka for that. And with that, I will open it up to questions and conversation.
Anybody else? Comments?
Just your question, your quote, Doc, about making it. Is that to sort of essentially highlight to the teachers that they have to take ownership of this, in terms of they have to, you know what I mean? Because at the end of it, it's always about the learning of the student, right? Obviously, but when you make it, hey, this is about a different way of teaching, is that what you're trying to do to empower the teachers that they need to kind of, I guess, adopt this?
Yeah, it's theirs. We talk a lot about autonomy, and that's what I love about blended learning, is because you as a teacher, you do have the, and you see, I was shaking to make sure I was on target. Yeah, you do have the autonomy to really teach the way you want to. I mean, we've got to keep our cornerstones in mind, of course, but it is. And it's also to say, look, we've got a lot of programs. There's a lot of programs. There's always going to be a new program out there. There's always going to be something else, right? But if you keep this framework in mind, this way of teaching in mind, you take those programs and utilize them to your, whatever that looks like in your classroom, but ultimately, you got it. This is you, and you get to decide how you want to do that. I will say too, we've picked up on some things that we know have worked, and so we've replicated those things, and I think teachers love that, but ultimately they do have the autonomy to decide it the way they like.
And you know, one thing that is so critical is that when you think about blended learning, we have had to change a lot of our practices and a lot of our approaches. Because if we're going to do blended learning in the classroom, our classroom are the teachers, right? Our classroom is the district. And so as we're preparing for next year, it's really about, okay, and we feel a little bit of pressure in the system, but the teachers are now saying, great, I'm teaching in a blended learning environment, I want to learn in a blended learning environment. And so we have started creating structures because we have to model it too, right? It's not just going to be in classrooms for teachers to deliver that type of learning. We as an organization have to redefine how we do that for them too, and make sure that they're learning in a blended learning environment. We have to have voice and choice and be able to say, this is a skill that I need to hone in on. Where do I go to get that learning? So it's changed.
I tried for the board too.
I don't know.
And there's your teacher, he's right there.
We can't
Okay.
trust these people to be like autonomous, be on stay on task. Yeah.
You shouldn't take that risk. Forget it. Belay my last.
So I was going to go off of the quote up there too, and it makes me happy to see that from a person who like has to talk to folks about what blended learning is, and a lot of them feel like, you know, all it is like technology. That's how they view it. It's just very focused on that, and I think, you know, you spoke to, you know, pandemic and right after like post-pandemic, I think a lot of folks, their view is, I just have this technology and it's just technology, right? So this, you know, gives, I think, a lot of hope, right? That they're actually, the way that it is being, provided to them is, this is a way of teaching. It's not just the technology for technology's sake, right? You have to look at it as a different way of teaching. And so I think that that is really important for us to get out to all of our stakeholders, right? That they realize that this is what we're using it for. It's not just, you know, here it is, learn it on your own. It's everybody's learning a different way of teaching, implementing that and using it for the better, and we are seeing results. So I think that that's awesome.
And one of the things that you see when you delve into the cornerstones of blended learning, they're just simply best practices. And they are best practices that have been around forever. It's just bringing them all together under an umbrella of a name. But I don't know if it was Veronica or Jessica that talked about, our goal is eventually let go of the blended learning term. And these are just the best practices that live and breathe within our classrooms, right? But right now, people need something to refer to as they're going through this learning process. But you know, I'm really hopeful, especially as we start to hit the 19 schools and so forth, that this is just what we do in our classrooms. This is just what good instruction looks like day in and day out across our district.
Mr. Prentice, if
Go
I
ahead,
might.
Brian.
So referring back to Dr. Perez's comment about remediation that the board might need, I was, which I agree with, I was wondering if our colleagues from Memorial in particular, just I want to do a shout out. It's so exciting to have a middle school just own this and show us how it can be applied to a secondary setting. So congratulations, I'm leading the way. My question is about kids that may not flourish in this approach. Are there kids that don't flourish in this approach? You know, maybe, and maybe that's not true. I'm just trying to imagine, like, I could see really self-motivated, self-directed, I'm all in kind of kids. They would just take off and fly. But maybe there are other children who don't, or how do you get them there? Anyway, you understand my question.
Based on based on doing walkthroughs, some of the things that I found. Like in that picture right there, they're doing a data accountability meeting. Well, Ms. Rodriguez and Ms. Jarrett have done an excellent job of scheduling one day in the spring, one day in the fall, one day in the spring for students to come in with their team members. And their team members are going through data from the math growth, which is where they started, and they're helping the students set a goal. So that's what's happening as a 7th grade teacher there, and they're doing the data accountability. But if you think of students that are struggling, and somebody like Ms. Milligan or Ms. Sanchez that are master teachers can take that student, and that student might be able to choose to work in a group environment, or that student might be able to choose to work on a format, that student might be able to choose on individual work. They have the must-dos that the student has to do, but they also have some may-dos that they break everything up. And so I'm finding those students are even more motivated. And it's helping them find a way to reach those students who might otherwise struggle, because there's so many different avenues for that teacher to work with. So one of the neat things, if you go to Ms. Milligan's room, there's a chart of how she's got each student coded and charted, and only she and the student know what that is, but they're charting their goals. If you go to Ms. Sanchez's room, she's got 2 or 3 groups working on things, and she's bringing students individually to her table. Or working on writing, or working on reading, or some of those things. And it's really powerful because it's a room of movement in the reading class. In the math class, it's more of a structured, but the students still have choice of activities and monitoring themselves and so forth. And so it changes with the subject, it changes with the child, it changes. And so many of our students that might be far behind take a master teacher like these 2 teachers, and they have so many different avenues to work with those children. And they've done an exquisite job.
Thank you for that.
I feel like I had to find like their little niche, like a reward that worked for that particular student. Whether it was like playing a math prodigy game if you finished everything, or if you get to a certain spot, we're gonna watch a movie on Friday. Like you just have to find what they like, and then it's amazing what they end up doing for you. So like my least motivated kids, they just started doing Matthew like crazy, and Matthew, and I was like, oh my gosh, I found it,
Right.
Before, they didn't like worksheets, they didn't like anything if they didn't see the results. So once I get to this spot, I know I've arrived, and then it's like a break, like I'm there, because they're so far behind that if you think about their end goal, they're like, I'm never gonna master STAR, because they know how far behind they are. That's how they think.
Mm-hmm.
So if you give them a little bit of a goal at a time, each time they see they meet that goal, it's like, I can do this. So that, I think you just have to find what they like.
Also, you have to like for my kids, I had to sell the program, right? I had to make them understand it's at your pace. It's it's the skills that you need to work on. And also the kids are learning about how to read their own data, right? They understand TEKS now. They know that this TEK is figurative language or whatever. And so they want to do better, especially when they see that data somewhere, right, on the wall or in folders. You have to get buy-in, and you need to build that relationship. Those 2 things have to be there, or it's not going to work.
Do you find that, teacher, I love, those are great insights, and I love the little short wins and the little, celebrate those things, and then it becomes sort of habitual, and it becomes sort of, it's incentivizing for the students, right, to do that, and then suddenly they look back and like, oh my gosh, look where I've come, right? But my question is, do you find that, kids are kids and like different age groups and everything else, but do you find that it's in any way can be humiliating to some students that are a lot further behind than others, or is that opportunity for some students to want to help them? And what are your observations just from some of the students who might be kind of further behind than others, and how do you approach that? And then do you allow them to help each other and stuff like that or not?
Absolutely, right? Collaboration is a huge part of it, and it's a great skill. Also, one of the best things about blended learning is that it's personalized to their level. So I might give a student New Zealot, right? I might give them an assignment, but it's at their level. They might have something on ExactPath, which is our computer program, but it's based on their data, so it's at their level. So we embed as much as we can to make sure that they're succeeding. And then we have the small group, right? Because you are gonna have those kids. That's what we're there for, to help with those learning gaps. So, I mean, the kids in Memorial, just amazing. I don't know if you can like duplicate that anywhere else, because we're pretty awesome, but they really are self-motivated. Like they just are, and it might be because they have the choice, but they do. I haven't seen that where they feel that
Well,
way.
and I guess because I guess, you know, it's just made these comments to mention that one of the classrooms where you can see all the kids and where they are. And I was just wondering, that was just my question because.
Well, I do probably room checks twice a week on maybe even for a minute or two. And I'm trying to think, I don't have any room that I can think of, 6, 7, reading or math, or 8, that doesn't have a chart to where the students are progressing. And I think the blended learning has started in 6th grade, but there's practices that are already transforming in 7th and 8th, because when they're seeing success, the 7th grade teachers aren't going to wait till next year. When somebody says, oh, we're rolling this out, they're going to start doing the practices that are already working. And so it's neat as an administrator if I stop a child in the hallway, what goal are you working on? Because I want to know if this data chart is just a picture on a wall or if we're living it. And when the students can tell you, I need to work on this and this, and I'm trying to get 3 more points, and they can tell you, it's exciting.
I just want to shout out to you and your administrators. Your teachers are incredible as well, obviously. But I mean, I think and we've mentioned this before at board meetings, and it probably can't be mentioned enough times. But I think that the principals that are connected to the front lines, to your point, that are in the classrooms, even when you don't need to be in the classrooms. I mean, you can, you're not there just when you're doing it's time to do the annual, evaluation of this teacher or that teacher, but you're out there showing them that you care about this work, that you're there to support them, that you believe in them. The students see that. That's a powerful thing to that culture, and really creates a delightful learning environment that this is important work, because you're there and your administrators are there, out there in the trenches, connected to the front lines, knowing what the issues are, where more support could be, where sharing the best practices, giving feedback even when it's not a part of a formal evaluation process. Those kinds of things are priceless, and I can't say this enough to the principals. I wish they were all here, but they're not. But anyway, yeah, I think the principals that do that kind of stuff, they have a better, learning culture, behavioral culture, etc. And I think that speaks a lot for you and your team. So thank you for that.
And I will say that has made all the difference. And when we are working with these studio schools, we have to educate the principal first, because just like Mr. Staley said, like, systems are changing. What they're doing at their campus is going to look very different once you bring blended learning in. And he's great at removing barriers right away. And the hardest part of blended learning, for secondary schools, was this whole concept of like the centers, right? I think each of you has been into an elementary classroom. There's all these different centers. That was like an impossible mission. See, they're laughing because that was the #1 thing that they said, that we cannot do centers in secondary classes.
And we don't call them centers,
And-
they're stations.
Right,
They're
station rotation. But I can tell you, I've been in Nicole's classroom several times, and it's 100% engagement. And in a middle school classroom, that's impressive, right? And she's working over here with a small group and the other kids, and it's just, they're moving around, just effortlessly. And then the last thing that I'll say is that it is very important to us that as we bring blended learning in, those adaptable programs are so important, because nobody knows what everybody else is working on. And nobody knows that it's a high, medium, or low module, or a high, medium, or low lesson. All they know is that they're going to get their own assignment in those adaptive programs, and that has made such a huge difference, because everybody's on a level playing field. Nobody knows where everybody is at. And there's a lot of value to that. Right?
Well, and more importantly, I just had the epiphany. It was like, everyone's learning, because obviously if you're teaching this and half the students really, it's like, shh. It's like, you know, I mean,
That's true.
you're wasting everyone's time because they're just not engaged, or like, whatever, they're just gonna, you know, I mean.
And even the students that are at the highest level also have part of an adaptive program that we're going to extend their learning. And that, you know, when you talk to students that are high achieving, they're like, I'm bored. You know, all the things that we've heard for so long, this eliminates that, because everybody's learning from where they are and they're getting to their own endpoint.
We definitely need this for the.
So, we do.
And that's
Talk
what
to
the
your
program
students.
So are the other middle schools?
That's a great
going
question.
To
So-
the other middle schools?
So I
Can
can,
I?
Sure,
piggyback? So, Dr. Vieta Allen started this principal huddles that we have. Probably once a month, where we go to different people's campuses. And the district, first of all, did a phenomenal job with the rollout. It's probably the best, or one of the top 2 best rollouts I've ever seen in any program. The pre-K rollout was exceptional, and this blended learning has been exceptional. Where Dr. V brings us together, just the middle school principals, and we have these times to talk. And then they brought all of the campuses to us in December, so they could see how blended learning was done. And I don't know that I could work with a better set of colleagues than I do with the middle school principals. They are each phenomenal. And we trade ideas because this format that Dr. V is giving us is huddles. And so I don't know that I can tell you that they're doing it to the same extent or they're doing it the same way, but I can tell you it's getting done. And they're pushing the envelope, and they are a phenomenal group of colleagues.
they are, they're really starting to have a different way of speaking to each other, right? And every month when we do learning walks, we give them the structure, but it's flexible enough that principals are going to drive the learning. And they're learning from another principal. Very different, because they're working with practitioners saying, like, this is how I got it done, as opposed to us bringing in part of the research. And then as we head into next year, we are approaching goal setting for campuses very differently. We are actually going to do that starting at the end of May with our leadership retreat, May 31st. And we're going to look at all of our data, reflect on the year, and goal setting will be done earlier. And that too will kind of drive how we can prep the system for next school year. So kudos to all of them.
So just to add one last item, and so while the campuses are not all implementing blended learning to the fidelity that you see here, they are implementing pieces of the programming, so things like student trackers. Those are happening throughout the district. Student-led conferences, those are happening across all of the campuses. So they're digesting them in smaller chunks versus, Memorial's gone all in and they're the studio school. But they're implementing aspects of that so that when that time comes that we're ready to jump full force, they're already halfway in, and it's just taking it to that next level. So, so regardless of whether you're a studio school or not, across this district, every campus is implementing some aspect of it.
Thank you, Dr. Cortan. Thank you all for agreeing. Our final topic is topics for future meetings, Dr. Miller.
And so we are coming into May next month, and so we're closing out the end of the year, and so just an opportunity for us to reflect on some of the things that we have put in place, and much like what you heard today, what does the next iteration of the work that we're doing, and so there's a few programs that we're going to bring forward and kind of share what that outlook looks like on some of these programs across our district.
All right. And with that, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Good job.